Hi, my name is Dawn Green, and I'm the producer of The Last Witch, a documentary. And today we're going to have a really nice conversation about our documentary. We have also Marilynne Roach, historian specializing in
Salem Witch Trials.
Salem Witch Trials, and the director of Last Witch, Annika, Hylmö, and teacher Carrie LaPierre, and some of her students. And I don't know, you're going to have to introduce yourselves.
I'm Lila.
I'm Neve.
Okay, thank you. We're very excited to be here at SATV. And we want to thank also Salem Ancestry Days for inviting us. Before we actually have our conversation, we want to show a little clip. And Annika, can you set that up for us?
Absolutely. So what we're going to show is a preview of some of what we've already filmed for this documentary. We came out to film about a year ago now, I think roughly, before Elizabeth Johnson Jr. was actually exonerated. So we had an opportunity to film in North Andover at North Andover Middle School, and we've got some representatives of those students today, of course, as well as Carrie, as well as some interviews with various historians, descendants, tour guides, and other people connected to the town of Salem and to the witch trials. So what we're about to show you is just a short snippet of what is going to be a much bigger project. And we'll tell you a little bit more about what's ahead for that. But for now, just sit back, relax, and enjoy.
During the Salem witch trials, Elizabeth Johnson Jr. was convicted of witchcraft but never executed. And now a documentary spotlighting Elizabeth's story titled The Last Witch is in production. And I hope you'll all take a watch.
She had everything going against her. She was female, she was not married, and there is evidence that she had some sort of disability, and all of those things would have made her somewhat of an outcast in her society.
In 1692, the people that lived here were isolated. And so there was a lot in their environment that needed explanation, and they turned to the church to explain.
When she was accused and brought to trial, she brought in this poppet, which is like a doll, and it was her weapon.
That she was probably mentally challenged in some way. And there's contents in her testimony that sort of hint at that.
An ancestor of mine was on the jury that found her guilty.
When I found out I was related to Judge John Haythorne, it was definitely shocking to know that somebody like that existed in my family.
My job is to teach them how the government works, so justice matters, whether it's 1692 and 3 or present day, how people are treated matters.
The fact that a group of 8th graders want to change history, it's unheard of.
A lot of people wanted to be exonerated at the time because they were passing on that burden to children, but she doesn't have children.
I'm willing to do anything at this point.
Hey everybody, great to be here.
We got contacted by a group in Scotland and other places in the world, not just in the nation.
Today is International Day of the Girl, which celebrates opportunities for girls worldwide. I'm sitting next to two amazing girls. Along with their classmates, they helped exonerate the last woman unjustly accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trial.
It's a really cool thing. I hope we will reflect on the misogynistic notions of womanhood and female autonomy that led to Johnson's wrongful conviction, on how the same misogynist logic could lead to new injustices in the present day.
Sadly, in some areas, I feel like we haven't changed. I feel we still have to hide because we are misunderstood or stereotyped. Salem is a place that you can just be yourself and not have to think about it. But there are other places in the country and in the world that you do not show who you really are.
Judge Hathorn more than likely would have thought of this class that is trying to exonerate Elizabeth Johnson as witches.
Part of what I do with the Satanic Temple and as a witch to stress that the concept of witch hunting is about you have to check yourself. You always have to remember not to just follow groups. You always have to think for yourself and not just follow leaders. Most people can draw correlations between that and current events.
My son is autistic, lashing out at his mother, lashing out at me and saying, I can't help it, I don't know who's doing this to me. And my father is a history teacher. He just looked at me in that moment and he said, if you were in 1600s right now, you'd be hanging from a tree tomorrow.
They saw someone that didn't look like they belonged, like walk past them, they might feel like a little like, oh, maybe they're like a witch or something.
I don't think what happened back then would happen now. Our society nowadays is so accepting of things like that, and we're so used to seeing different people and different beliefs and religions and ethnicities, so it's more accepting now.
My students quickly recognized the connection of bullying somebody who's different to the story of Elizabeth Johnson Jr.
Okay, so thank you all very much for watching our little sizzle reel. We wanted to start, Marilynne, with you, and if you could tell us a little bit about who was Elizabeth Johnson Jr. and why is it so important to exonerate her?
Well, she was the granddaughter of the town's older minister, Francis Dane, and her mother was accused. 2 siblings were accused, an aunt was accused in the course of all this, and she also was accused. Her grandfather later, in a petition to the court, described her as simplish at best. It's assumed that she may have been a slow learner of some sort, but he was convinced she was not a witch, and please have some mercy on these people, some of whom are his relatives. A lot of his relatives got accused. But she's arrested. She's arrested along with 2 young children, Martha Carey's youngest daughter, Sarah, who is interviewed in Andover, confesses, which is to say she agrees with whatever leading questions are put to her, and says that yes, Betty Johnson was with her and so was with her, and they tortured these particular people in town who thought they were being bewitched. And Elizabeth, who's 22, she says, it's phrased as a confession. Yeah. It's written down that way, but it could be a summary of the questions that were being asked to her, as other people in town who confessed said they just were agreeing with whatever people said. They were so terrified they didn't know what they were talking about. So she's being very cooperative with the authorities. She describes going to this witch meeting and that witch meeting, and the usual suspects that put her, yes, Reverend Burroughs was there leading the devil's sacrament and so on. And she's cooperating fully with people, saying that yes, they tormented Benjamin Abbott and Lawrence Lacey. These are grown men who apparently have some real physical problems, maybe, but it's being assumed that the witches are after them, and that certain children who are teenagers, really. They must have asked, do you use poppets, the little doll things? And she says yes, she's being cooperative, and she produces them, which I think was just things she happened to have in her pocket. This happened with another suspect too. It's pieces of rag, they said, or they're probably something left over from sewing, was my guess. And she had it in her pocket, and there was so many strips wound with thread, and the other one was 2 strips, and it had 3 pins in it for 3 victims, and then the other was a piece of birch bark. And they're accepting, theoretically, with evil magic, you could work by sympathetic magic, by sticking pins into these things, theoretically.
Right.
But, you know, I think it's just something she had in her pocket. And they take this down as evidence. So, well, most of that was the next day when the most recent suspects are in Salem, and they've already been questioned in Andover. And Hawthorne starts out with, well, you've already been questioned, so tell me more about this confession. So preconceived notion that they're guilty.
So basically she's convicted because she has confessed.
It's taken as a confession.
And she has these puppets.
And she has the puppets.
These dolls on her.
Right.
This 22-year-old girl.
Right. Well, well, anybody who sews, I suppose, could have something in like that, but not common enough so that the neighbors immediately think they're puppets. But she's arrested and she's in jail for 6 months, which is in her favor, really, because anybody who's tried that summer, and this is like the 10th of August, I think.
In 1692. 1692.
Right. So her trial doesn't come up until January of 1693. And by then, there's been enough opposition to the way things have been going that they finally heed the advice that they had from the very beginning for most of the ministers, that don't use spectral evidence. If somebody says they see an apparition of the witch or whatever coming at them, you cannot trust that. It could be the witches sending it, or it's very likely that it's the devil's deception, and that's finally what they figured.
Spectral evidence
being that, and presumably causing harm, allegedly causing harm to the bewitched witness who is feeling jabs and pains and having convulsions, maybe at least part of the time believing that that's what happened. But you know, if you stopped with that story, it was assumed that you had sold out to the devil, so you wouldn't be hurt anymore. So it was a really difficult situation to be in on all sides. But
so these witnesses were just saying, "Oh, I saw something. I felt something," and normally that kind of evidence wouldn't have been admissible. But for some reason, that
this is where you want to be a fly on the wall, not actually present, but a fly on the wall to see exactly what's going on. There's a lot of dialogue preserved in the records, but it's not everything. And as the trials go on, it gets more and more summarized too, because it gets going and going and going. But by January, there's been enough opposition. They're not supposed to use spectral evidence. There's 50-odd cases go before the grand jury, and so many are tried, and only three were found guilty. One of whom was Elizabeth Johnson, Jr. And
why would she have confessed?
Well, she confessed in the first place when everybody else a lot of people were confessing. Most of them did, because they were frightened, I think, and confused, and because the confessors were being kept as witnesses against the alleged conspiracy of witches, and that put off executions. And some people, I think, believed if I confess, maybe they'll leave me alone. But it wouldn't. But some of the confessors, Abigail Hobbs, for example, was very cooperative, and yet she was tried and found guilty. She wasn't killed because everything got stopped in October. And the trials resume in January after people have calmed down. The special court has been dismantled because now the whole government is being designed to fit English requirements, and the regular superior court has now been established. Same court we have now. The first cases were witchcraft cases.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
But they're not supposed to use spectral evidence, and only 3 are found guilty. Elizabeth is one of them. But the Attorney General, the King's Attorney, said in a letter that he didn't think that the evidence against them was any better than the spectral stuff from the summer before. And at the last minute, the governor stopped the executions that would have happened, I think, in February.
Okay.
So she lives through it.
So she was pardoned.
She could go home. She was pardoned, but the verdict was not reversed, so that technically it's reputation. It's hanging over you all this time, and if everything went crazy again, maybe the death penalty would be imposed, possibly, but although it wasn't. Because at this point, the courts are not going to touch a witchcraft accusation.
So she was still, even though she was pardoned and she wasn't actually executed at the time, she was still considered a witch. She was
on the books, she was guilty, and who knows what any particular neighbor thought.
How did that affect the rest of her life?
Well, I don't know, really, because she doesn't show up in the records much, and I think if she hadn't been accused, we wouldn't know anything about her particularly. But she never married, and but she owns some land. She managed to inherit, and I think she sells it at some point. But her name is put forward to be in the 1711 reversal of attainder that would reverse the guilty verdict, and she's left out of it for some reason. I don't think there's any one list that had everybody in one place who had been found guilty, so you have to kind of reconstruct it each time. And not everybody who had been found guilty was in that first reversal of attainder. So her brother Stephen, I think, petitioned to have her name restored and to be put in the attainder, but it didn't happen. Probably a scribal error, a bookkeeping error or something, but she petitioned in 1712 to have it put in. Would your honors please restore my name and put it in the reversal of the attainder so the verdict isn't there? And nothing happened until 300 years more had passed.
300 years later. So there's been a big effort to have witches, people accused of witchcraft, exonerated, and we know that a lot of people were exonerated. Elizabeth Johnson Jr. And I think we need to clarify that difference between somebody who's exonerated and somebody who's pardoned, right? So somebody who's exonerated, then they are legally no longer considered a witch, right? So why is it that Elizabeth Johnson Jr. If everybody else was exonerated, what happened to Elizabeth Johnson Jr.?
Well, not quite everybody, because some names weren't there. But in 2001, 5 people were cleared by name. Some of them had sort of been named, like John Proctor and wife. So Elizabeth Proctor got her name put in 2001. Unfortunately, that bill was signed on 31st of October. Possibly a symbolic date, but not really appropriate, and like that. But then finally, Elizabeth's name came up. In fact, I didn't know about it when I was writing my first book on the trials. I thought everybody had been cleared, but then I realized my list of the guilty verdicts was incomplete.
Right.
And then other people realized that, and the whole movement.
And it's 329 years later. Why? I think a lot of people would wonder, does it matter? Who cares at this point? Why does it matter that she was exonerated?
Well, of course, in writing about and studying the witchcraft trials, they seem more and more real the more you know about them. And it just seemed right. It would tie up ends tidily and fairly. And I hope in an afterlife she knows that.
Great, very nice. So, Carrie. Yes. So thank you for being here today with all of your students who were involved in this project of getting Elizabeth Johnson Jr. finally exonerated. Can you tell us a little bit about how did you hear about it? How did you get involved?
Randomly, really.
there's an author, Richard Haidt, who wrote a book about the Andover area during the witch trials. North Andover at that point was part of Andover. So he had done a lot of work at the North Andover Historical Society. A former teacher from the middle school was very involved with the Historical Society in town and walked by me in the hallway one day and said, "Hey, would you be interested in being involved in this?" And I said, "Sure." And then that was probably about 3.5, 4 years ago now. And I met Richard. We talked about, he explained the story of Elizabeth Johnson. Realistically, I may have been very naive in my thinking. I'm like, oh, this will take 2 weeks. And, you know, of course, the legislature is just going to go along with it. And maybe the Eagle Tribune, which is our local paper, will care. And that'll be that. And all done. Didn't turn out that way. Obviously, I had 2 years worth of students working on it. Obviously, this bunch was part of the group that finally made it happen through their efforts. But it was a really important project in the sense of it connected them to something that happened in their town. And I think that's important for them.
Yeah, so now we want to hear from the students. So what did you think when you got this project?
I think at first we were all kind of confused because we didn't know what was happening. But then the more we dived into it, the more we all wanted to help and get involved. So at first I think we were all just kind of like going with it just because it was another school project.
Yeah, it was kind of like another school project for most people before we actually got involved and heard about it more. I heard it from my sister who was started the project in the year before us, and she really so I knew about it going into it, and I think I walked up to Miss LaPierre and I was like, "Are we gonna finish this project?" And she was like, "Yes, but shush, I'm gonna let you guys know in a second." So it was more of like a school project to most of us in our eyes until then, we got more immersed in it, and Miss LaPierre helped us with that. We looked at the actual documents and we looked at the scribes from the court, and I think it just became more personal, and we all saw the injustices being done, we saw the bullying, and it just we all could connect it to things still going on today and stuff like that, and we got involved.
My first thought was that there was a lot of research because you had to know all the background knowledge before you wrote. Our first thing we did was you wrote these letters to have them pass the bill. And I wasn't really sure if it was gonna go through because we already had a year. The other class had been doing it and they didn't really get that far and we had to continue it. And towards the end of the year, I got really confident and I was really excited. And then it took so long that I kind of plowed out. I lost my hope a little bit, and then this summer I got really excited again. So
I mean, I thought it was really fascinating, and I remember going home and telling my family about it, and I was like, this is what I learned today, and this is what we're doing, and I was just really happy to be a part of it and everything.
I think for me, it didn't start to feel real after we started writing to the Senate and calling them, because after hearing that and then getting other people involved, it made things a lot more real, because before I just felt oh, we're just doing research and we're just searching up this person. So it didn't really feel connecting. And then after it did.
Do you guys feel connected to Elizabeth Johnson Jr.? Did she sort of come to life for you?
I feel at first, not really, but after digging deep and learning about her past, I feel a little bit more connected to her, because even if there was other people, just getting this part and her exonerated is really important. So
yeah, I felt connected with her, also learning about her and trying to understand her emotions. She must have been scared, confused, and just felt why is this happening to me? It's not fair. I don't get it.
Yeah. Do you feel it really matters to you to have her exonerated?
I think it's important that she got exonerated because she was one of the only ones that wasn't, and that wasn't fair to her. And she was treated unfairly and people thought she was different. So that was one of the many reasons that she was convicted as being a witch. And so exonerating her really makes it so we're all accepting her.
Yeah. So you feel you're standing up for her.
Yeah.
also, like, at our age, it's like good to be looking at stuff like this and getting like our eyes opened on like history so it doesn't repeat itself, and seeing the injustices done. And now that we're like older and like, or like now that the project's kind of over, because it did happen, we did exonerate her, which was really like fun to just see us like we can make a difference. But like looking back, this is good for us. Like in the future, we can like college resumes, obviously we can put down as references, but it could really help us in life, seeing the legal actions being taken and that you can make those differences. And just like seeing that stuff happen is just cool to see, because you don't really think about yourself being that person that can make it happen. And now we can say that we were. And also like in class, we were learning about it as we were actually doing it, because it was like the curriculum, we were learning about passing bills through legislator and like the Senate. And then we were doing it in like real life. And it was just, Ms. LaPierre did a really good job of like connecting that for us.
Yeah, and I think it like really made it real to us that you don't have to wait to be an adult to make change in the world. Like we were 8th graders, 12, 13, 14, that we could really make a difference and not have to wait around for other people to do it for us.
So do you feel like this project, like the before and after, you really, you learned something incredible, like it's a whole different world for you?
Yeah, because we also learned about our government and how like you can pass a bill and all the steps you have to take and how you can really change something you think is unfair.
There's always going to be like a takeaway for all of us from this, like the injustices, the legal like way it happened, the way we can speak up. So I think this is just really important project altogether. I know it might not be important to some people, but for us and for our group and for our age and for our teachers and for our community, it was like an important project and everyone really got involved in it. Like my whole family, like we all would like dinner table, we'd talk about it. It was really fun.
Yeah, we all learned different things, and it was cool to learn so much about the way that our government works and to really notice the difference. A group project and how everyone put so much hard work into it, and it's just rewarding to see that all pay off.
I mean, I feel like the project really put something that like I feel like I couldn't reach, or like I'm like, oh, I can't do anything to change anything, but it was like, wait, yes I can. Like it doesn't matter my age, I can do something to help.
I think it definitely also helped the fact that the entire class was doing it and we weren't alone in it, because in a way, if you were by yourself, I feel like it was definitely harder to stay connected and continue going on with the research and staying, just like staying consistent with the project. So
yeah, so it's the idea of like being a part of a democracy. The democracy is, you know, of the people, right? So you are participating in your community and your country. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
Do you feel like you have, you know, now you have other projects you want to do? Are there some direction you want to go in?
I feel like not currently, but if there were things that I knew that I could easily understand and I could make a difference in, then I think I would eventually try to do something like that, because this felt, even though it wasn't something that currently happened and it was getting someone exonerated from a long time ago, it felt like just those steps made it so much easier to like open your eyes to something else.
I mean, this entire thing reminds me of like women's rights, and still today in most places, like a lot of women were treated completely unfairly, and it just reminds me of it. So if I had the opportunity to help or do anything, I would.
After learning the steps you have to take to make a difference, also the women's rights these days, I think that I could definitely do something like that again to help change a law or a rule that's been passed or an idea that's been thought for a couple of years.
I mean, yeah, like what they were saying about like women's rights, like I've always thought it's unfair, and if I could do something to help, like now knowing the steps and some things I can do to help will really help. And if there's a greater cause I want to contribute to later in the future, I know what I need to do and how to help.
I think it also helped us like think about future careers and stuff. If like we took up a legal field like a lawyer or something, or even like a judge, like seeing if we would be interested in that and getting us thinking like about all the processes and stuff, and understanding that like maybe someone wants to become a senator, maybe someone wants to become president. I know everyone dreams of that like when they're younger. But
sure,
it really helped you think if you were really interested in that during that project. And like I would be interested in a field like that, seeing that now, like seeing the difference you can make and stuff like that. But like also if you weren't interested in it, like you know that now. And yeah, also seeing what's right and what's wrong, and like speaking up for yourself really in the women's rights. Like what was that law that was being passed at the same time?
Roe v. Wade.
Roe v. versus Wade
was
being like undone.
Right.
During the same time we were exonerating Elizabeth. And I remember speaking with like my classmates. We had little tables in class, and I remember we had 2 guys at our table and 2 girls. I was one of the 2 girls, and we were speaking about it. And me and the other girl, we were talking to the guys, and they were like, so what do you think about it? And they were like, well, we don't really know. And so we were trying to explain it to them, and it was just like an eye-opening thing where we were able to bounce ideas off of each other, learn new things from each other, and just seeing that's like amazing. That's happening in a school atmosphere.
Thank you. Annika, I'm going to come over to you now for a moment. Annika, our director, and just talking a little bit about the documentary. How did you get involved, and where are you going with this?
Discovery. Well, it's definitely a process of discovery. So the origin of the documentary really started during the pandemic, because I was researching together with a colleague, Cassandra Hesseltine, and I were researching the Salem witch trials for what we call a narrative story, that is like a feature film. And during our research, came across this incredible story about a school teacher and her students who were working to exonerate the last convicted witch or accused from the Salem witch trials. And I looked at this and I said, this is a documentary. This is an incredible story about people in a smaller community standing up for what's right and making a difference. So there's an origin in this. Of course, I'm interested in witches and I'm interested in spirituality and all of these questions, but there's a very real groundedness in this story that really speaks to me. I come from a background as a teacher myself, and I love the idea of learning by doing, because I find that I learn by doing, and I find that most people that I've ever taught, it's the same thing, that when you can apply what you're learning to a particular situation or context, it makes sense. It becomes real in a very different way. So I reached out to Carrie and said, Carrie, can we talk? And we did. And we talked to Senator Diana DiZoglio, who was spearheading the campaign through the Massachusetts Senate. I think we started to talk in fall of 2021. And then the story just took off from there, because I think it was in February 2022 when all of a sudden it stalled in the Massachusetts Senate. And that was a point when we all looked at each other and we said, what is this? Why is the state Senate saying that they're going to put this particular bill out to study? And all of a sudden, it's almost like there's a conspiracy there, so we have to play along with that a little bit. But it made me more interested in the story, because it made me question, why is it that this woman has been essentially, I think, Lila, you mentioned the word bullying. Why is it that she's still bullied after 330 years? It would seem like this is so simple, so easy to just go ahead and insert her name with everybody else that's already been exonerated. So we came out in May of last year, 2022, and filmed Carrie and the students, and we filmed Marilynne, and like I said before, a number of other people, politicians, tour guides, historians, people are in some way connected with the trials, to try to discover more and learn more about what that experience is like historically, but also how it's impacting today. Because there's history, it's not just in the past, but like all of you were talking about, we're learning from history and we're living history, we're experiencing history. It's impacting us today. So we came out and we had some tremendous interviews, some of which you could see just a little snippet of right up here on the screen. and started to craft the story before Elizabeth was exonerated. And then, of course, from there, more things happened, right? So what happened then was that because it didn't pass originally, it was put out to study, which basically means it's dead. They're not going to do anything. And we talked about how this would have been potentially, you'd have to start all over again with this, right? Yeah. Start from the beginning. And we talked to the students, and they were kind of looking at each other and going, well, that means that the next class is going to have to do all of this work too. And I don't know if that was something that you were like, yeah, you're going to do this too. Or you weren't like that, no. But so there was that question of what's going to happen next. The Senate then picked up the story and said, okay, so maybe, I heard this was partly because there was a documentary in town too, but we'll take a little bit of credit. All of a sudden this became interesting again. And so, but they had to figure out how to pass it onwards so that it would come to Governor Baker. There was a debate in the Senate about attaching it as an amendment to the Massachusetts state budget. We're not kidding you. That was the debate. And at that point, so she wasn't exonerated, but the media around the world literally started to pick up on the story as well and started to spread the news, which was incorrect, that Elizabeth had been exonerated about a month before Governor Baker actually signed off on it. So we started to look at this as well, and we started to realize this is a big, big story that we're dealing with, because there were news media, not only locally here in Massachusetts and Salem, but the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, CNN, and it literally spread around the world from there. So it spread to Brazil, to India, to Australia. It spread to Italy, Portugal. I mean, we followed this story that all of a sudden became very big with false information, because this was false news that was spreading on top of everything else. So we followed the story and through the point where Governor Baker finally did sign off on this, so that Elizabeth was officially exonerated July 28th, 2022 of last year. So this story has really, it's just grown. And so for me, it's fascinating to see the story grow, but also to see, like I said before, this whole idea of bullying that comes in, that we can see on a personal level, how Elizabeth was bullied during her examination. She was bullied into confession, more or less, and then forgotten for all of these years, while other people were exonerated, as everybody should have been. And how we can look at this and see how people, including, we're talking about women's rights, how bullying feeds into that, for example. So it's been just thematically a story that's just grown for me personally, just watching it. And also seeing the growth in all of you guys, because we're following you, and we're going to come back and do more interviews with some of you just to kind of see, okay, so now a year later, high school and everything, what does that look like compared to middle school? And how has this story impacted you as you're moving forward in life, careers, decisions that you're making, ability to stand up, and how hard that can be sometimes to stand up for what's right? Because it's not easy. It's not easy to stand up and say, we need to correct something that's wrong, whether it's historical or it's in the moment. So,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, that it makes, I'm going to try and open this up to more conversation amongst all of us. My question is really, well, gee, could this sort of thing happen again? Do you think it could happen again? Anyone?
I definitely think that it could happen again. It could be a small story like what we had, and we could make it a global thing, a global effort, and get a lot of people in on it. So I definitely think that there is a high chance that it could very easily happen again.
I'm unsure, because there's been a lot of things that have happened in past that are now being repeated. I thought that would never be repeated again, but I definitely believe that learning about history prevents it from repeating itself.
I have to agree with Talia. I think the fact that when we started working on this, it was unclear how this was going to help anything. But now, knowing that we changed that, And knowing that that's the steps that it takes and that sometimes history does repeat itself, that was really important. So that way we knew that if something like that did happen again, which I think it's possible that it could, that we know how, not necessarily how to stop it, but like how to help with it. Sorry.
So I already think it kind of has happened with like women's rights to vote and seeing all these like little cases like Roe v. Wade. We've already seen stuff like repeated like that, seeing women's rights being taken away or seeing women be belittled by like people in the government. I think it's going to happen again, to be honest, because we're still working to get our voices heard, but we are getting our voices heard nowadays, and people are opening their eyes more, and this idea of women being less than men is pretty much going away. It's always gonna be there. You can't erase someone's ideas, you can't erase their opinions, you can't belittle someone like that either. But I think it will happen again, and when that happens, we have to be ready to speak up.
I feel like our story of us speaking up for someone who doesn't have a voice can also help others realize that they can stand up for what they believe in, and that there are other people who want to help, want to give in and help somebody who can't. And we kind of was like the voice that showed people, doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter your gender, doesn't matter who you are, you can make a difference.
And kind of like what you were saying, it's a lot easier to just stand there and be a bystander instead of standing up for someone who's being bullied. But now that we've already done this, it could be a lot easier for people to see that, oh, there are people who care, and it's easier to stand up when there's other people with you.
Any of you thoughts?
Well, I thought it was really interesting, even watching if you saw on our short video here, that there are people who are here in Salem even that are talking about this being a safe place and stepping outside of a safe place community. It's no longer as safe for people. And I think that's something that many have experienced, that you have your own safe space, but outside, diversity is hard. Being different is hard. And whether that is, I think in Elizabeth's case, we talked about mental health, for example, being different in some respect, stepping outside and being different. It's so easy for you to become a target. I think many of us have felt like we're a target from time to time too. So I think it's something we can definitely relate to.
I think when she was arrested, there was a neighbor woman who was kind of snickering and saying, well, her mother will be next. And her aunt took exception to that and did say something, I think, but she was arrested too.
Exactly.
Although some of the people who were the modern people being interviewed, I was describing an autistic son, he might have been considered bewitched because the Shattuck kid, Samuel Shattuck's family, it sounded like some developmental thing, but they were certain that Bridget Bishop had cursed him. So it could be either way, but yeah, different.
Very, exactly.
I think for me, and just listening to these guys speak, because obviously it's kind of been a year since I've worked with them, and I work with 8th graders every day, and I think it was an important time period for them to deal with this story. Middle school's a rough time in most kids' lives, and they're trying to figure out who they are, and being different is also a struggle, but yet they want to be unique. And so I think this was a great lesson for middle schoolers specifically to walk out going, okay, first of all, we need to be aware that it's okay for everybody to be themselves, but also that we need to stand up if someone's being mistreated. I think that for middle schoolers is a huge lesson.
I think it's a huge lesson for all of us.
Well, true.
Yeah.
Right. So what do you see happening next with the project? Where are we going?
Oh, we are very excited about this project because obviously there's a lot more work to be done. We got the initial footage that we filmed last year, which we're very excited about. We're coming back to Salem and to North Andover especially to film a little bit more because we want to get some updates from people that were part of the project to say, okay, a year later, where are we now? What is your experience there? We also want to hear from some of the parents about their perspective on the project. And we would love to hear from some of the school administrators and the community to say, what's your perspective on a project like this and how it fits into civic education? We're also, fingers crossed, we are coming back to do some more filming at the Peabody Essex, where we already filmed. What we want to film there includes the original documents that have the confession, the examination and confession from Elizabeth Johnson Jr. So we have several pieces that we still want to film to get there. And then we'll be piecing all of this together for what we call an assembly cut. Initially, just say, what are the beats? What are the major aspects to the story? So coming back then one more time, because we're not done yet with this. They're really excited. This is the piece that I'm really, really excited about. And that is coming back here this coming fall, again, fingers crossed, and filming a reenactment of the scene exactly, using the transcript from the examination to film a reenactment of Elizabeth at the meeting house. There's a beautiful meeting house over at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead that we would love to film this at and see what it would have been like. A little bit like we talked about being a fly on the wall. What would this have been like to be a fly on the wall, not just as a historical reenactment that usually integrates the audience, but really to feel like we're part of what Elizabeth would have experienced going through the motions and being there with the reactions from the people that were there in the gallery, bringing out the puppets and having that entire experience to see what that would have been like. So those are our next phases of filming. And from there, we'll piece together what's going to be, we hope, an incredible documentary that can show the journey, Elizabeth's journey to exoneration, and also the experiences of Carrie and the students, all the students from the 2 years, in telling the story in a way that can then reach a community outside of this, a small community making an impact in a bigger world, and even a bigger world around the world, which we've already seen, as we said, the first start of that. We want to show more of that and be able to share the story and inspire other people.
I'm sure that people are really interested in seeing this film being completed and come to light and be out in the world. How can people show support? What can we do to show some support?
Lots of ways that everyone can show support. Of course, everyone being here today, that's the first number one thing. We would love it if everyone would follow us on social media. With the more people that can follow us on social media, comment, like, share. You all are experts at it, we know. So we're counting on you to help us reach parents and other people in the community as well. So, but following us on social media, commenting our posts on social media, and even sending things to us from time to time that you think this fits in with a theme or something that we're talking about, that's very helpful to us. So that's
spreading the word.
Yes, spreading the words. That's the number one thing. And talking about, keep the story alive by talking about it at home and families and so on. We would also love it if you went to our social and our webpage. If you came to our webpage to stay up to date with everything that we have.
And what's that
going on? I don't need to say www. thelastwitchfilm.com. So our social media is The Last Witch Film, and it's thelastwitchfilm.com that you can reach us at. For those people that want to feel like you're really, really a part of this project, we're funding at this point. And so any contributions that people want to make or any resources that you can think of that can help us with funding, would be really helpful. Plus, it's kind of fun. Even if you've only contributed $1, this is your project. It's not just our project, it's your project. So those are the different steps, the different levels. Spread the word.
Spread the word. I will add in that, we're a small indie film project, and if you want to see more projects like this, then show us some support. I want to say, were there questions from the audience? Did anybody have anything else they were curious about, they want to know about? Or any questions up here? Anybody?
I have a question. I'm behind the camera, so I don't have to put it on myself.
Yes, it's okay.
So I actually, just a comment, I think it's really wonderful that young people at your age have already found your voice, because a lot of people, it doesn't happen to them until they're much older. And I just think that's really wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if any of you have questions as well, you might have questions of myself or Dawn or Marilynne or Carrie.
I have a comment. I mean, you're the age that the afflicted accusers were, but you're doing something constructive about it.
Yeah.
It's not a question, but it's like a comment. Like, I'm really excited to see like where this goes, and I'm just like really happy because I was like being able to be a part of it. I'm like, where does this go for like the future thing?
I just wanted to say thank you to Miss LaPierre for like giving us all these opportunities with this project and even bringing the project to us. It's good that she gave us the ability with our civics project to give our voices out and speak up for something that we think was wrong, and giving us something to look at. It was just really her who started it all.
Right. I have a question for all of you. What did it feel like to hear that somebody said that back in the day you would have been considered witches?
Okay, you're stepping on us. Sorry. Okay, sorry.
I think that it's just showing that back then, even if you tried to make a change in anything that you did, it was considered different. And nowadays it's showing how much that's changed and how much people can make a difference, and how much it doesn't matter how literal, how big, you can do something about it. And I think back then, calling people witches about what they did, or if they had something going on, or if they were different, it was just like society's way of like labeling each of them to make sure they didn't do anything. Or I'm not really sure, but that's what kind of I feel about.
I mean, I also kind of feel like everyone who's like labeling people as witches were kind of like scared and hiding, because they know that if they were caught being different, that they would be accused. So they're trying to point fingers, and it just kind of scares me that that was what the like world was like. That's how people were like in society, and that like it frightens me to think that just me be myself, I could be accused for no reason.
Also, that how like quickly it spread was kind of scary too, because it took like 2 girls throwing fits, and almost immediately everyone started believing them, and it just became like a whole town community thing that everyone got into. And it's just kind of scary to think about how something so small became so big, and it created so much destruction and so much death.
It kind of just makes me grateful for the world we live in today, that even though we do have our issues, we're not hanging people and executing them publicly just because of what one person says, or if one person has a backache and they think they're being cursed. Like, our legal system has been much more advanced, and our ways of viewing religion, we don't usually let it try to get in the way of our legal, and like we try not to judge each other. But obviously there's people out there who don't have the same perspectives of us and will try to do that. And it's just a good way to have our voices heard and be ready to speak up for ourselves. But it just makes me grateful, like today there's more people who have different ideas and different, like come from different backgrounds, and like we all can come together more, and it's like a group speaking up. We're not scared of like a church telling us, no, like you're being hexed or something like that.
It also is kind of like how if one person has an opinion and a bunch of people follow them, like it's safer to take that route out of fear, but those people who were themselves can create like their own route and people can follow them, and it kind of shows you how you don't always have to follow everyone else because your opinion does matter.
In a way, I also feel like these type of things are kind of like a virus, if you think about it, or like a sickness, because it starts with one person and it spreads, and it's really hard to get rid of it and change the way it affected people, but it's possible to find a cure for it. So I think of it in that way, I guess. Build the immune system.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a really, really interesting conversation, and I'm so happy you are all here. And I want to again thank Salem Ancestry Days for inviting us to come here, and also to SATV, Salem Access Television, for having us today. We have a sponsor in town. We have been sponsored by both Gulu Gulu Cafe as well as the Flying Saucer. So shout out to them. And they are offering discounts. So if you come today, Sunday, we will be at the First Church of Salem at the exhibit hall. And if you come by, we will give you a coupon to Gulu Gulu and the Flying Saucer.
And a couple of other goodies.
And a couple of other goodies. We got a lot of goodies. So, thank you very much. Thanks.
You're incredible. You guys are so smart.